Our next storyteller is Sophie Lavoie, and Sophie is the curator at the Douglas Family Art Center, a place that's near and dear to me. She's an artist herself and worked in the private art world before moving to Kenora about 8 years ago. In her role as curator of a collection of works by Canadian artist Walter J. Phillips, she's had lots of opportunity to look into his life and to study his works, particularly his Lake of the Woods works. And so that's the story she's going to share with us today. So please welcome Sophie Lavoie.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to make sure this clicker's on. Just out of curiosity, who knows the artwork of Walter J. Phillips? Can I just see some hands? Oh, not bad. That's great. That's great. As Laurie said, I'm the curator of the Douglas Family Art Center, the Muse, and the foundational collection is Walter J. Phillips. So the Douglases donated a significant amount of works by WJ. And they focus specifically on Lake of the Woods. So it's a period of his work. And it is unique in the country. There is no collection like it that focuses specifically on this area. When I talk about Phillips, I want to impart to you, I'm not originally from here, I wanted to impart to you guys how proud you should be of this body of work. Because he's one of the reasons why people know Lake of the Woods. They've never been here, they'll never be here, but they love this place because of him. So, my first memory of Walter J. Phillips was recognizing the work of a master. I'd been working at Loch Gallery in Winnipeg when I saw a watercolor painting that truly impressed me. At the time, I was producing my own large format watercolors. When I mean large format, I'm 4 feet watercolors of underwater ocean landscapes. I choose watercolor for my work because it speaks a visual language. Is anyone familiar with watercolor paintings? A few. What's nice about watercolor is it speaks wet. Even when it's dry, you can understand that it's the way that it moves is through water. And so it was appropriate for my subject. But there are techniques that produce a wide variety of watermarks. And displaying a history of wet paper. The paper can bloom as if running, or watercolor can stain, or it leaves trace of pigment which sits on the paper like gold in a pan. For me, watercolor is the most beautiful of all the paint mediums. It has a capacity to produce a luminous, jewel-like depth of color that I love. For everything watercolor has to offer, though, it is non-negotiable. It is unforgiving. It is demanding of the highest level of attention. There are no corrections. There's moving on. Only those that invested years in practice will harness the true beauty of watercolor. In W.J. Phillips' work, I saw a level of skill with watercolor that I had not seen before, and I thought, wow, who is this artist? So W.J. Phillips was born in England in 1884. Traditionally, watercolor had been a part of a formal education. So you can think of map making or botanical drawings. So it was mostly used sort of to color other works, pencil, graphite works, or pen and ink works, and then used to color them. However, the French called watercolor l'art anglais, which celebrated the use of watercolor as its own medium. So not just used as in the formal education, but its own mature medium with a focus on landscapes. So studying watercolor masters such as Turner and Constable and Cotman, Phillips had a great respect for a watercolor tradition, and it would prove to be the medium in which he expressed himself most naturally and be a consistent medium in both masterful English-style paintings, such as this one here, or in studies. All the images I'm showing you are from this area. Some of them are untitled, so part of my job is figuring out where they are, but that's not always so easy with Phillips. So Phillips has said, I use the watercolor medium, I think, partly because of its difficulty. It keeps me interested, and partly for its brilliance, for I love color. Water has been called a breakfast of sunshine. It has been called many things. What quality of watercolor is how the light of the paper shines through the paint. So here, the sky is not white. It's not a white that's added. It is the white of the paper. These layers are called washes and can be translucent or they can be opaque. A master can build up layers of translucent paint into a depth of color impossible to achieve from a tube. This is actually my theory by the Headwaters. Just on that rocky point on the left. This medium is incredibly expressive. It is magic, almost alive. Wet the paper, load the brush, and then wet the paper and watch the colors run. So he did not actually have to drag that all the way through. He would have been able to just stop in an area, and if he had wet a streak, it would run the streak. So it rushes across the surface. While it's still wet, you can paint even another color where the pigment is slightly heavier. And when that wetness reaches the wet of the paper, it can actually push the first one away, creating a wave. This is a Keewatin sunset. A quote by Phillips: "The evening sky over the end of the bay is laced with wisps of golden cloud that Turner loved to paint. The moon is low on the horizon, and we are between the sun and the moon, and this is the golden hour." Phillips believed that taste was mutable, but beauty was eternal. It is said that beauty was Phillips' touchstone, that everything he made was beautiful. He said, "Of the lake it still appeals with an intimacy that makes every rock and every tree a possible shrine of beauty." He was a romantic at heart and can make the ordinary exquisite, capturing an atmosphere unlike any other. In rain, the lake is hard to perceive beyond ghostly trees obscured by sheets of pouring rain. Or, also familiar, smoke haze. A red sun hangs heavy in the air, thick with smoke from distant forest fires. Again, Phillips. Here at the Lake of the Woods, the majestic cumulus clouds often rise in the eastern skies in the evening. Tinted by the sun, they reflect its last rays, gold, orange, red, and the last ghostly gray at night. So the Phillips family immigrated to Canada in 1913, where he became art master at St. John's Technical College for 24 years. Being a teacher did require him to work full-time, but he was determined to be an artist. He sold work to who he called the professional class. These are art collectors who also cottaged at Lake of the Woods. Phillips. On the prairies, the entire professional class summers at the lake, which is one of the most beautiful of God's creations. In 1914, when Phillips and his family first traveled to the Lake of the Woods, renting a cottage in Norman Bay, Phillips wrote, "Our cottage at Lake of the Woods is built upon a rock, a rounded mass of granite jutting out to the lake, bare of any vegetation, save for a grove of young jack pines and a wild cherry or two. The veranda faces the sunrise, the sunset, and the northern sky, and the back door opens on the forest. There's a miniature cove with a sandy bottom and a ramshackle boathouse beside it. We spent the summer months here, and each night we're lulled to sleep by the soothing night cadences of the waters in the woods." Lake of the Woods became a place Phillips would return to for the next 25 years, mostly over the summer, sometimes in the spring or in the fall, but again, he's coming by train. And he liked to paint in watercolors, which is, as you can imagine, especially challenging in winter, as it freezes. Here's the Phillips family. Phillips is the man in white. That's his wife, Gladys. At that time, they only had 5 kids, but the family grew to 6. The Phillips family were very active among the summer residents and social circles, as many were their friends in Winnipeg. Notes in the various papers will mention that the Phillips were staying with friends in Keewatin or Keewatin Beach, sometimes Clearwater Bay. Walter and his wife Gladys were actually invited often to cottages to play bridge. They were often the team to beat, and what a lot of people don't know is they went on to win a national bridge championship. Phillips would easily transfer his love for beauty to our Canadian landscape. Sketchbooks were filled with studies of clouds and trees, rock formations, birds in flight, sometimes watercolor sketches, along with notes on subjects and colors. Exploring the area by foot or boat, because those were his options. He traveled around Keewatin and Mink Bay and Portage Bay, Norman Bay and Kenora. He embarked upon excursions of Lake of the Woods and the Winnipeg River. In Phillips' words, "The village is 2 miles away over the water, but there are other cottages within call and numerous islands in the bay. Every day brings new adventures, whether we set out in the canoe on a short excursion or in the launch for a long one. The map pinned on the wall is a tantalizing document, as most maps are. And if there is any sense in nomenclature, the adjacent lakes and the streams spread out upon it are alluring to the last degree. One canoe route leads from Clearwater Bay through Granite Lake, the Lake of Two Mountains, Moss, Bear Mountain, Crow, Duck and Rush Lakes, back to the starting point. Desiring places. Who would not wish to see them?" So this is an artist that is literally going through the muck, experiencing all the mosquitoes for the love of a language of this area. Phillips enjoyed exploring the wilds and communities of the area, many whose names feature in the titles of his work. This one's called The Golden Hour. In 1917, he said that the beautiful simplicity of the woodcut technique dawned on him, and once he decided, was determined to produce his first print. So a woodcut is a relief print. So you cut into a block of wood, and there's a block for each color. You put a piece of paper on top, and with a brayer you rub it, and then you have the print. And it's called sometimes a wood block or a woodcut because you're using a knife. A wood engraving is also using wood, but using like a graver and more sculpting tools. So these are some of his tools here. So we have some of the knives off to the left, and this is the brayer, and this is what he would roll the ink onto the block with. At the time, the medium was undergoing a Western revival in Europe and the United States under the influence of the Japanese technique. It's rather dark. There's a piece called Canmore, and it only had 4 blocks, and he was actually able to carve all parts of the block on one piece. That's what that's supposed to show. It's showing a bit dark from my angle. So in Japan, the early color print was the result of 3 men collaborating. There was the artist, the woodcutter, and the printer. But during this revival, artists who wanted to make color prints did everything themselves. And despite being essentially self-taught, Phillips became an avid student and dedicated himself to perfecting the technique. So now we have Phillips being the designer, the carver, and the printer. He said, "I had therefore all the fun of experimenting blindly, more or less, which perhaps fired my enthusiasm." He would delve into printing, creating 39 prints over the next 5 years, 26 of which were inspired by Lake of the Woods. This is Crow Rock. So Phillips believed that the artist had to be true to an area. He called it the visual language of an area, but had the permission to move elements around, such as trees or rock formations, in order to make a nice composition that would appeal to an audience. Some of you might go on holidays and you want to take a picture and it's so beautiful and you hold your phone up or your camera and you're like, it's just not going to do it. It's not going to cut it. We're not going to feel a sense of it. So he said, well, artists, you have a right to take said tree and maybe this rock formation. It's all Lake of the Woods. It's true to the area, but good luck finding it later. That's my job now. So this is a sketch of Poplar Bay. This is the watercolor that I was fortunate enough to borrow once for an exhibition. And then this one is the woodblock. What I like, I'm not originally from here. What I really like is when I put things like this up and then a whole bunch of you come in and then you say, why are there York boats in Poplar Bay? So Phillips said a landscape painting in which composition is ignored is like a line taken from a poem at random. It lacks context and may or may not make sense. So here he is, stretching historical accuracy a little bit with this woodcut Poplar Bay, Lake of the Woods. This is 1930. He depicts York boats in Poplar Bay. Well, merchants would travel, yes, the Rainy River up Lake of the Woods, down the Winnipeg River. However, it does capture, well, you know, a scene of Lake of the Woods. We can tell by the pine and the granite on the side. However, I have been informed by those that are from here and know their history that York boats would never have a reason to travel in Poplar Bay, being a dead end, and no camp being there. But who knows what some of the secret history is. At any rate, we forgive Phillips for this because, of course, it's beautiful. So Phillips predominantly used cherry wood. The Japanese used cherry wood, and so he was using predominantly Canadian cherry, what he could find. And there is some wild cherry here. The reason why they're using these cherry, I'm going to stick on this one here. If you look on the rock formation here, the color is very even. So with cherry, the grain is very tight. It produces, when you roll the ink on, it releases it in a very even way. So it's beautiful for that. So it's tight grain and uniform grain took well to carving and also printed dense, rich color evenly and consistently. However, when Phillips moved away from tradition by experimenting with other local woods, he made an incredible, it was an international sort of discovery in printmaking. A watercolor print from a block of fir reproduces with the utmost clarity all the beauty of its rippling grain. Fir is difficult to cut with a knife. The slowly grown winter ring is hard, and the summer growth is soft. But this disability becomes a quality in printing. This is called Mary at the Lake. And on the left is the first edition made with cherry, but then you can see, those of you that are up on your wood, that the right-hand side, the rippling of the water along the lakeshore is actually fir grain. One of the first examples of this exploration is Mary at the Lake. Phillips recognized that when printed, the grain of the wood resembled the ripple surface of water. This use of wood grain in its prints would become a distinctive element of Phillips' style and another example of his keen observation of nature's design. Phillips found that Canadian cherry tended to better suit his purposes, especially when he wanted to achieve gradations of color by layering one color over another, like the bather. This is the bather here. Walter Phillips was an amateur botanist who took inspiration from what was in his environment. So this is obviously, we recognize this as fireweed. I think this is Tunnel Island. It's a guess. I share this interest and recognize his work. In his work, lichens, fireweed, Queen Anne's lace, to name a few. He painted tall Gothic spires of white pines crowning many islands, as well as the layered, detailed bark of the red pine. There's a spot where I walk in Vernon Trails that always makes me think of Phillips. It's this piece in particular. That is red pine, just by the bark. This is Phillips. Many people have remarked that my paintings display a fondness of tangled foregrounds and of foliage, and in particular, pendulous branches. They say it looks Japanese. Well, experience at the lake, however, might teach them that such are typical of the wild Canadian woods, and that vegetation obscures nearly everywhere, and that the tangled growth is so thick that often an axe is needed to cut a way through. Art Nouveau influenced Phillips' printing style, which he adapted to the Canadian landscape. This period is 1880 to 1914. Artists of this movement developed designs inspired by floral and organic forms. This is an example. This is a monogram. These are monograms of Phillips. So for over a decade, he used this. So in each of these, there's a W and a P. First, more inspired by Art Nouveau. We see a very floral sort of W, and inside there's a P and there's a J, and then he starts changing it. And then eventually he stopped using it. He would actually print this directly in the wood blocks. So you will not find this in a watercolor or in any works. And in 1927, he stopped doing them, so we don't see them in any engravings either. So I say that he created a boreal Art Nouveau because instead of tangled vines, he would use the gnarled hanging branches of the jack pine, or instead of irises and poppies, he would stick to wild rose and water lily. Some may be surprised to know that W.J. was as much a writer as he was an artist. This is a blessing for any curator, because by reading his words, which I've shared with you today, we can go directly into his mind, into his heart, and get a better understanding of what is driving his work. This also helps me in some of the clues of where I can find in this area, because as I said before, Phillips might take an element from one area and plunk it somewhere else. So you're like, oh, I know that rock formation, but somehow it's included in another one that's 10 kilometers apart or something. So that can be challenging, but a lot of fun at the same time. This is one of them. This is the work Sunset Lake of the Woods. For the longest time, people were trying to find this island. They were always looking west, and so they never found it, because when Phillips made the piece, when you're facing this island in this direction, you're actually facing south, where no sunset would actually be. So eventually, yes, the island has been found. So he was also a contemporary of the Group of Seven, but he didn't share their sentiment. And he would sometimes, Fitzgerald came here and they would stay in Norman Bay together. And then there was also Johnson that came here. He wrote an article titled Artists in the Winnipeg Tribune, as well as articles in the Winnipeg Free Press and Beaver Magazine. He felt that the artist was dependent on the public, and so an artist has a duty to inform them. And so he shared a lot in his writings, which anyone can find, which is great. He would explore the prairies during the Depression and not come here too often during that time. And also, he did take trips in the 1920s to the West Coast and British Columbia. He was once asked where his preferred sketching grounds were, and Phillips would respond, "Wherever I happen to be, it is the light I paint, the sun and its corollary color." Woodcut, this is Norman Bay number 1. Woodcuts have always been his bread and butter, though. They were prolific and enabled him to survive. The Depression years were very challenging because he was raising a family of 6, and he was no longer a practicing teacher. He was a full-time artist. He is actually one of the rare ones that did survive in that time, on his art alone. He took contracts illustrating books, taking commissions with the Hudson's Bay Company. This is Stream Keewatin. He would write regular articles for the paper. He worked with the newly formed Department of Tourism, Mining and Fisheries to advertise the newly formed Whiteshell Provincial Park. He went so far as to have auctions in his own home of his prints and paintings, securing sales of art at 30% of their pre-Depression value. Determined, Phillips ensured his children were provided for, with original works exchanged for rent, doctors, dentist appointments, and even music lessons. Phillips painted the portrait of the Dean of the University of Manitoba in exchange for the tuition of his daughter Lois. In 1934, Phillips was commissioned to illustrate a memorial for the late Mrs. Margaret Craig by her husband R.W. Craig, who served as the Attorney General of Manitoba from 1922 to 27. Craig asked Phillips to produce a setting for a poem that Mrs. Craig had been reading on the day of her death in 1934. The Craigs had a much-loved summer home in Keewatin and were friends with the Phillips family. And actually, Phillips paid their son 10 cents a day to paddle him around so he could find different subjects. This is the subject for a poem here by Henry Van Dyke. As you can see, it has her window with the curtains, what would have been on the ledge, and the scene to the place that they loved. Once printed, the piece was only sent to the Craig's close family and relatives. It is an edition of 34, and we have one in our collection at the Douglas Family Art Center, thanks to the Malahers. It was during those harsh years that Philip still delved into wood engraving. This is a wood engraving here. So he's using more a graver and only black ink. He actually loved the contrast between the richness of the black ink and the white of the paper. 3 of his engravings are of Lake of the Woods. Immersed in the nature he loved and time he spent with his family, summers at Lake of the Woods were a treasured time for Phillips. His family meant everything to him. He was deeply attached to his children and made sure to balance his work and his time with them. The Phillips children thrived at the lake, enjoying an idyllic childhood. Their innocence and play made them perfect models for Phillips, who captured those precious early years in paintings and woodcut prints. His daughter Lois said that they also received the flat rate of 10 cents a day to pose, even if that meant posing all day. The quote was, "My young family disported itself in the water and along the shores all day long." This is one of the rare pieces that Phillips has actually included himself in a woodblock. Is the only one that I know. This one's called Rest. And also those of you that are botanists, this plant obviously grows here in certain areas. I do not know the name, but I found it. So those works featuring his, it was at the lake that the Phillips children were most often featured in his work, has once grown, had lives of their own. His youngest son, Ivan, passed away in the war. And so for me, when I see these little pictures, this artwork of Ivan, it's when he was here. And of course, that's probably where he's remembered most. Those works featuring his children were some of Philip's most cherished. So here we have a little sketch, a watercolor. Like, who takes the time to paint lichen like that? This is Margaret, his youngest. This is one of his most famous prints. I don't have time. I'll get into it. Come see me. So Philip's work continues to be actively collected today. There's an audience who have a love of this region, as I said, despite never having been here. I was one of them until 8 years ago. So W.J. Phillips' work imparts some of the natural magic of this Eden we call Lake of the Woods. And I can call it Eden because everybody comes here generation after generation, so it must be so. Another one of his children. This is John, his eldest. Does anyone know where this is? It's Norman Bay. Last fall, I had the pleasure of taking a renowned art historian, somebody I had been in touch with since before I came here, and told her about my show, Phillips Reunion, and she had to come. This is Lisa Christensen. She's exceptional. And so I took her to the very place where Norman Bay is from. She was overjoyed to be there and in awe that it was so accessible. She normally takes people through the mountains of Banff to find all those peaks that the group of 7 painted. So for her to just pull off the side of the road was a little mind-bending, but she loved it. So we spent the rest of the day actually roaming around. So this is the print Norman Bay, and he won an international award for it. You can't see it quite here. There is, do I have this thing here? Aha. There is a grain here. So there is a rippling grain that he used to mimic the curved shoreline, and it went into an international competition in 1923 in Los Angeles and won top prize. Let's see. So of Lake of the Woods, Phillips would write, "I am always glad to be back there, and whenever I may have been, feel tempted to record some of the beauty that is everywhere apparent beside those peaceful waters." In 1940, Phillips left Winnipeg for the Rockies of Banff. He's one of the founders of the Banff School, and it is unknown if he ever returned to Lake of the Woods. And that is all. Thank you very much.